Agricultural work has always been looked down upon. We don't have any workers, the food's just going to have to come from somewhere else. Unless we want everything in a can, you're going to have to support the local guys. And even though you have land or water, if nobody knows how to grow it, it ain't going to happen. So farmers have not been treated or respected very highly. Agriculture is very uncertain. You could do everything right and still lose your ass. One of the biggest ways to take care of the people is to give them good housing. There's no reason we should have unaffordable housing in our communities with vast acreages out here.
Who's Lon Inaba?
Just an old retired farm boy.
You can't fool me with I'm just a simple farmer, Lon. Hi, Roger Frawa, co-founder and executive director of Flower Hill Institute. Here to talk with Lon Inaba, who's an amazing friend and mentor and developer of workforce and farmer housing in Indian country and well beyond, as you will find in this great conversation we're about to have.
Hi, my name is Lon Inaba. I'm a third generation Japanese American. I guess we refer to ourselves as Sansei. I grew up on the Yakima Reservation, went to school at Hara Elementary and Wapato High School, and on to Washington State University, where I got a degree in agricultural engineering. So I'm the former president and general manager of Inaba Produce Farms that we sold to the Yakima Nation. The entity is now called Yakima Nation Farms.
You know, Lon, I was really excited this morning to wake up and look at my calendar, and this is the day I was really looking forward to. As you know, as I have described in the past, we're not just professional colleagues, we're friends. You've been a mentor of mine. I've called you a number of times and seeking advice, and almost in a way you're a hero of mine because of the work that you've done in and around agriculture and specifically agriculture in Indian country. I've had the opportunity to meet your mother. I've had the good fortune to meet and get to know your brother a little bit and your sister. And I know you've got more siblings than the three that I have met. But just good morning to you, Lon, and welcome. And what kind of day did you wake up to in Yakima, Washington today?
Beautiful sunny day. Beautiful sunny day.
Yeah, we've got the same here down here in New Mexico. Lon, as I have already described, you know, I've had the good fortune to get to know you, and I'd like others to have that same good fortune and to get to know you too. So if you didn't mind, if I asked you the question of who's Lon Inaba?
Just an old retired farm boy.
I think, Lon, I'm not falling for that. I think, you know, I've used that, and I've tried to use that before, where you say, oh, I'm just a simple farmer, you know. But when you really think about Lon Inaba, or when I think about Lon Inaba, and I think about really who you are as a biologist, hydrologist, a botanist, a business person, an entrepreneur, a mechanic, an engineer, a scientist, and you do a lot of that work with plants and with water. You do it with farm equipment, but you also do it with people. And I know that your career path has taken you far and wide, you know, well beyond the Yakima Indian Nation, which we will be talking about some in greater detail, I hope, today. But I also know that you serve on the local irrigation board. I know you serve the state of Washington in a couple of different capacities. I know you work very closely with Northwest Harvest, one of the largest food distributors in these United States. And I know I've actively seen you on your farm very generously feeding people. And I've seen truckloads of farm produce leave your farm and not a dollar has been exchanged. So I know that you're a great humanitarian as well. So you can't fool me with I'm just a simple farmer, Lon. Can you tell me a little bit more about your, before we get into Lon Inaba, I know that because you've introduced me to this, as a third generation Japanese farmer in Eastern Washington, and I know a little bit about your family and your family history. So could you describe just a little bit about your grandfather and his generation, and then your father and his generation, and maybe yourself as a young man growing up on that farm there in Eastern Washington? you'd grace us with just a little bit of a kind of a snapshot into Lana Naba from your family standpoint.
Well, my grandfather and his brother, my grandfather was Shukichi Inaba, and he came in '07. And along with his brother Tomoji Inaba, he, he cleared land on the Yakima Reservation. And so um, he was educated in Japan in agriculture. And so he was recruited by the Japanese Association in the Yakima Valley to help teach the Japanese immigrant farmers who came to this reservation to help them get going on the farming practices. And the tribal people um, were very gracious in allowing the Japanese immigrants to lease their land. And so the Japanese, in one book, they were credited with breaking 20,000 acres out of sagebrush on the Yakima Reservation. And they also helped to clear the lands of sagebrush as well as digging the early irrigation canals. And they had great relationships with their tribal landlords, probably because they kind of shared some of the same miseries
Mm-hmm.
as their tribal landlords did as well. My dad took over as he came of age. The Japanese were not allowed to become citizens if they were aliens, but the second generation were born here, um, and they were American citizens. And as they became of age, they were allowed to sign for the leases and purchase lands. Prior to that, my grandparents could not purchase lands, and so there are a lot of alien land laws that were really tough on the Japanese aliens, and but the tribal people were there as well as their Caucasian friends to kind of get them through some of these uh, problem times. During World War II, they were evacuated. They pretty much lost everything they had accumulated up to that point, and they were shipped off to Heart Mountain, Wyoming, another desert area. But they actually cleared land out of sagebrush out there, helped to dig the irrigation canals, and produced such crops that the people outside of the camps complained that the Japs in the camps were eating better than they were. Uh, they didn't know that they actually produced it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Upon coming back to the Yakima Valley, only 10% of the Japanese population returned. And my dad was one of the early guys. And, you know, I, he wanted to make it. And he would tell me stories of sitting on his tractor, until the sun went down. And, uh, and he turned the tractor off. And if he could hear another tractor going, he started to back up and kept on going until when he turned the tractor off, nobody else was there. Then he'd come home. But
Lon, was
it
that
was
was that a
back
work ethic thing,
that was
Lon?
the work ethic.
Okay,
Yeah, that was
wow.
just tremendous. And
Yep.
and you know, and but he lost everything, and he had nothing to come back to, and so he wanted to make it, and so that was his work ethic. And my grandfather, pretty much the same way. And when they came back, they came out to the Hoptowit family, who had leased to them a number of years prior, and they Charlie Hoptowit said, "You could, I don't have the piece of ground that you had when you left, but I have another piece of ground that you're welcome to farm." And so um, I kind of hear these stories where my grandmother tells me that Dave Wilbur loaned him land and allowed him to loan him money and allowed him to farm their land. Um, the Hoptower family the same way. And, and so, when I came back in 1982, we were just growers. My dad had not got paid by one of the shippers he was shipping to, and so he decided if I'm going to keep farming, he's going to have to be a shipper. So my brother, you know, walked away from college and came back to the farm, and I was working at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation for a company called Battelle Memorial Institute as a research engineer, and I took a 6 month leave of absence in 1982 and came back. And shortly after I came back, our greenhouse burned to ground, and so we had to rebuild that. But I actually did more engineering probably in 3 weeks back home on the farm than I did in 3 years at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. But yeah, so we went from simply growers to growers, packers, and shippers. And by doing that, we not only got the growers share, but we got the packers share, and we did it all on the reservation. And um, yeah, I became involved with the fire department, involved with the water board, and you know, I'm just so proud of the irrigation system that we have on the Wapato irrigate on the Wapato project on the reservation. That yeah, I got on the board and currently serve as the chairman of the Wapato irrigation Yakima Reservation Irrigation District, as we're called. But we pretty much represent all non-tribal um, water users on the reservation. And so, but I went to school on the reservation. I went to school with a lot of people, and when I heard about the Ag Development Project that the Yakimas um, were were talking about, um, I went to them. I said, "Hey guys, yeah, I'm 65 years old." And they said the first thing they're looking for is a small packing house and warehouse facility. And I said, I got one of those. Is that something you're interested in? And yeah, they jumped at it. And I had a great um, council at the time that wanted to pursue the purchase of our farm, and it took us 3 years to make everything happen. But it happened, and I spent a couple of years helping to transition to the farm. And during that 3 year period, the COVID thing hit, and at the time we were giving our off-grade produce to Northwest Harvest. Um, and when the COVID epidemic hit, they had to turn all their um, volunteers home, and they needed somebody to do it. And since I was giving them produce, they asked me to do it. And so um, we got involved, and they went from a strict donation to one of the best customers we ever had.
Hmm.
And it was a good segue into the sale to the tribe, because the stuff that we consider off grade is probably better than what most people see in the store.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be too fat or too skinny or too short or too long. And but it's fresh. And when you're looking at fresh local produce, you really can't get anything more. And so and in the course of our tenure there on the farm, we developed cold storages, greenhouses. We have an ice plant that could probably produce enough ice for all the tribal fishermen on the Columbia River. And with what we discard, and we were currently giving it to Northwest Harvest, you know, we probably had plenty more that could serve all of the tribal communities in the Pacific Northwest during our season. I mean, it's kind of tough to produce things with snow on the ground,
Yeah.
but we have a wide variety of stuff, and we have uh, we had a really good group of workers who had been with us for for 20, 30, 40 years. And we established housing for our guys. We established drip irrigation. We got into the organic produce business. And we became probably one of the larger, what I call chop suey vegetable growers in the Pacific Northwest. Um, there are a lot of guys who were bigger than us, much larger, but they were just maybe strictly potatoes or strictly onions uh, or strictly fruits. But we had probably 20 different, what I call chop suey veggies: peppers, onions, tomatoes, sweet corn, bell, cabbage, asparagus, Concord grapes, a lot of different things. But it's what you see in a grocery store. And so we had very good cooling facilities, and we were known for good quality produce. So that's pretty much who we are, and that's who our farms are. And we've got a great community out here, and we're proud of our community.
Lon, when you use vocabulary chop suey, what does that mean as a description of a category of produce, or how are you using that terminology? I'm not familiar with it.
I guess maybe it's my term,
Yeah.
but it's everything you'd put in chop suey, you
Okay,
know,
got it. Yeah.
and it's like I said, peppers, onions,
Okay.
asparagus, cabbage, and that was we got into those items because when the alien land laws hit, um, they restricted my grandparents from actually leasing the ground that they broke out of sagebrush,
Hmm.
and so they were forced to share crop. And so instead of farming 120 acres with horses like my grandfather, successfully did, he was down to 20 or 40 acres that people allowed him to share crop. And and so because of that, he had to get out of the traditional crops that were grown in the valley of hay and wheat and potatoes and get into something that would return a higher value per acre. And those were the water intensive, labor intensive chop suey vegetable
Hmm.
crops.
What was, hey, Lon, what do you think the original connection was between the Japanese alien coming into, of all places, the Yakima Valley? I mean, I just don't see that as like, on the ports of, immigrant landing, like San Francisco, New York. How is it that the Japanese found an amazing, beautiful place called the Yakima Valley with all of its fertile soil and amazing water resources and whatnot? What do you think is the original connection between the Japanese immigrant and the Yakima Valley?
Well, my belief is um, when the Yakimas were put onto this reservation, uh, they had parcels that of allotted lands that went to the individual tribal people,
Mm-hmm.
and then they changed the laws that kind of allowed white settlers to come in and settle the lands um, like every other square on a checkerboard. And so the Yakima Reservation uh, was kind of broken in half. So it was like 40 some odd thousand acres. And so my guess is that, if the settlers could come in and um, take that land and break it out of sagebrush, there's probably a reason why they bought the land that they could purchase and break out of sagebrush rather than lease that land.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those early settlers, if they're going to put the work into it, they wanted to purchase the land. The Japanese could not do that. And so they were happy to come in and lease the tribal lands, those allotted lands. And so when I look at some of the uh, documents, I learned that the Japanese were credited with breaking 20,000 acres out of sagebrush. And so that's roughly half of what was open to farming on the reservation. And so my guess is those were those allotted lands because, other people didn't want to lease and break the thing out of
That's a lot of
sagebrush,
hard
but the
work.
Japanese
Yeah.
were willing to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, and so they were happy to do that. They were very successful. And but then they were so successful that by 1920 they changed the law and said not only could the Japanese not become citizens and not purchase land, but then they changed it so they couldn't lease the lands that they had broken out of sagebrush. And so because of that, they were forced to change their cropping structure and get into these what my grandpa referred to as Mizumono crops. Mizu in Japanese means water. So
Mm.
water loving crops, water loving, very labor intensive, management intensive crops. And because I think my grandfather was educated in agriculture in Japan, I believe that he had the knowledge on how to grow those different crops that others probably did not have. And so that was kind of why they rotated into that. And the Japanese people coming from an island country,
Hmm.
land was very limited.
Yeah.
And so they jumped at this chance, I believe, to have the opportunity to farm larger parcels. And I can't fault the tribal people because they were not used to farming,
Yeah. No.
and
Yeah.
so
They're fishermen and they're
I think that,
hunters. Yeah.
yeah, and so I think that's probably why the ground wasn't broken out of sagebrush. And I think the obligation of the federal government was to utilize these lands to provide for the livelihood of the tribal people, and it wasn't happening.
Hmm.
And so I think that the Japanese were recruited to take that task of developing those lands.
Did your grandfather ever become a citizen, a U.S. citizen?
Well, I don't think he was eligible until like 1954 or something like
Yeah.
that. And so my grandmother and my mother's parents did become citizens, but my grandfather pretty much said, they took everything away from me three times already.
Yeah.
Too old right now.
Hmm.
I don't need to become a citizen. And
Got it.
so it was one that did not become a citizen.
Have you ever been to Hart Mountain, Wyoming? Have you ever gone there?
Yes, I have.
Wow.
It's pretty you know, pretty harsh conditions.
Yeah.
It's down in the desert, and they had barbed wire and guard towers with guys with machine guns, and even though some of the people locally said, "Oh, we're sending you there for your protection," my dad
Yeah.
would
Right.
say, "Why are the guards watching us?"
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Their back should
And
be
the
toward us,
barbed wire
not
is
the.
facing in.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
So
That
no,
must.
I've been there. It's pretty rough. Pretty rough.
I didn't really get the understanding that from a political basis, the inability to lease and how that forced me to look alternatively to like more irrigated crops. I kind of got lost in that piece there. What can you kind of close the gap for me from if I
Yeah.
can't lease and I'm gonna go to this type of crop?
Well, the the way they could continue in the valley uh, were simply to work as sharecroppers,
Okay.
and because they couldn't lease on their own, they couldn't. My grandmother called it. Well, it was illegal for people to sublease to the Japanese as well,
Okay.
and so people had to work out these arrangements that the Japanese would work uh, like like a sharecropper, pretty much. I mean, but they would, they would farm a portion of somebody else's land, but not officially, because it was illegal for those people to lease land. Even the tribal members, it was illegal for them to lease to the Japanese. I mean, pretty much the laws were there pretty much to force the Japanese out of business
Yeah.
and out of the communities. And my grandmother called it farming like a mole
Hmm.
under the ground. Okay,
Okay.
like a mole, and it was like that because it really was an illegal act for people to allow the Japanese to sublease from them. So it wasn't officially subleasing. It was pretty much sharecropping. And so the leases on the reservation here uh, said that at all times um, you had to grow alfalfa hay on a portion of your lease because that was the crop that could capture the nitrogen from the air and provide it to the soil.
Hmm.
And the other crop that they would grow are these deep-rooted cereal crops like wheat or rye, and and they would reach deeper down into the root system and bring those micronutrients up to the surface to enrich that soil. And the money crop was potatoes. Okay. And so the Japanese, because they couldn't farm large acres, the only crop that they couldn't, they didn't have fertilizer. Fertilizer wasn't even invented. Okay. They didn't have mega dairies, so they couldn't even compost, even though my grandfather knew how to compost. Uh, and utilizing animal manures in the cropping practice. So they were very limited uh, on what they had access to, the soil. They had to sublease, and if it wasn't for their non-Japanese friends who had leases, or their tribal landlords who had the ground that they can offer, the Japanese simply would just have to go away. You
Yeah.
know, they, because they were pretty much put out of business by, they could have been put out of business if these laws were really strict and strictly policed. But the tribal people still needed somebody to lease land.
Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody needed to produce the crops in the communities. Yeah, so it's kind of difficult to explain,
Yeah.
but it just kind of dropped the status of the Japanese immigrants to a lower level,
Yeah.
and so that's a lot of people left, you know, but the ones that uh, stayed had those um, non-Japanese friends who were willing to sublease to them, or tribal landlords who were willing to sublease to them illegally,
Yeah.
because by state law it was illegal for the Japanese even to lease that land.
Hmm. Did you know
So
any
yeah,
families
it's a
or
difficult.
yeah, did you have relationships or know any families, Japanese families, where that was enforced and they kind of forced them out?
No, because that was before my time.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
I,
Okay.
I was around back then when that
Right.
when that was happening.
Right.
But and and if they were forced out, I wouldn't have been around
Yeah.
to
Okay.
know that. I'm sure that a lot of people did leave. So
Yeah.
some people went further to other states that didn't have these alien land laws, and um, some people actually went back to Japan.
Wow. Hmm. Well, you come from very hardy people. Obviously, your grandfather, your father's generation, and the ones who cleared sagebrush, and the ones who turned off their tractor, waiting to hear if there's any other noise out there, in terms of their incredible work ethic, Lon. And I think that shows. To me, it shows in you, and the kind of person that you are. Henceforth, again, being a mentor and a hero of mine. With that incredible work ethic. So just thank you for sharing that. I think it really gives us kind of a peep into Lon and Inaba, maybe in a different way, knowing and hearing a little bit about that. And you described, your interaction with the Yakima Nation and the Yakima families, and kind of the symbiotic relationship as the Yakima, who are kind of known all around Indian country as fishermen and as in hunter and gatherers, and really not the traditional farmer that you might find elsewhere around Indian country, and how they've had this symbiotic relationship with the Inaba and other Japanese families. And I don't have to, kind of guess what was well written and documented in New York Times and on CNN, and this historic exchange between the Inaba family and the Yakima Nation in the transaction of this, really newsworthy and well publicized transaction, as the Inaba actually did transact the land back to the Yakima as not sagebrush anymore. It was well developed into a world class recognized farm that really its reputation again preceded itself. Not just in the Northwest, but well outside the Northwest in terms of its produce. I had the opportunity to be there as you were harvesting this really just this huge crop of asparagus. That's like, I'm not a big asparagus fan, but on that day I was turned into one because you actually had just picked some and harvested some asparagus, and this was what you called the B class stuff that wasn't going to market. This was stuff that was in the giveaway bin. I've never had such amazing asparagus, and I now, Lon, thanks to you, and I am a very large asparagus fan, and I love having a steak and asparagus kind of mixed together, just based on what you had afforded us for. And can you talk a little bit about your, to the extent you're willing to, talk about the transaction, your business transaction with the Yakima Nation, and kind of returning their sagebrush land as a world-class farm? Can you talk about that period in history?
Yeah, I went to school on the res. So I went to Hara Elementary School, graduated from Wapto High School, and probably, a quarter of my class were tribal people.
Mm-hmm.
We've had long-standing relationships with our tribal landlords. There are families that we leased ground from for 60 years, and I've always tried to know my landlords and deal directly with my landlords, and things happen better that way,
Mm-hmm.
rather than having other parties in the middle. And so as we've done that, we've always welcomed our landlords, and as well as our workers. And if we're farming produce on their land, or if they're working for us, they're always willing to take whatever they need for their families. And yeah, it always worked out. We've always had good working relationships, and our Hispanic farm workers and our tribal landlords and neighbors, have always looked out for us, and we've always kind of looked out for them.
Hmm.
And so I got a lot of fish, a lot of berries, a lot of different things. And so when we went and decided that we were getting old, we wanted to retire, my mother's comment was, "Hey, if we sold to anybody, I'd like to sell to the tribe."
Hmm.
And so that's why we tried to honor her wishes and make it happen.
Your mom, obviously there's a lot of wisdom, and that wisdom based on experience there. And it was again a very newsworthy transaction. Again, well publicized as a very good transaction. How would you describe that acquisition, that transaction between, just in terms of like a word or two? Was it a hard transaction? Was it easy? Was the negotiation process? How would you describe that?
I think it went very well.
Okay.
They wanted to buy the farm, and we wanted to sell it,
Okay.
and took a while. Oh,
Yeah.
took time,
Yeah.
you know.
Right.
And I think anytime when you're dealing with you know, things by committee, everything's going to take a while, and that happened. And so, but um, I was quite overwhelmed when we made the transaction, and the Yakimas kind of wrapped us in Pelton blankets, and and really a
That's high.
lot of the
That's high praise, Lon, when that happens.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was really impressed, and
Yeah.
so yeah, it was cool. It was a good feeling, and it gave us the opportunity to um, kind of return the kindness that was showed by the native people to the Japanese, not just our family, but
Hmm.
to the Japanese community that came. And at one time, I believe they had, I don't know, 800, 900 folks on the reservation here, and the Japanese came prior to a lot of guys, not that long after the state of Washington became a state, and the reservation was established. The Japanese, in order to break ground out of sagebrush, they were here a long time ago.
Lon, I can hear the crack in the voice and the sincerity of, not just honoring your mother's wisdom wish for returning the land back to the Yakama Nation in terms of her preference, but really it's just the experiences of the institution of the Yakama people as an institution and the Japanese people as an institution, and really kind of getting through some very tough times together, when they shared those tough times, and experienced some of that, prisoners in their own homelands. The Japanese shared that as U.S. citizens, and the American Indian shares that alongside those Japanese. So I'm sure there was some kindred spiritship in hearing the crack in your voice as you describe the high honor and praise that the Yakima consummated the transaction with, wrapping you in blanket. For doing really kind of the right thing. You also described, though, a third party, and that was the farm worker, and you described that as kind of the Latino. Was that kind of the dominant or predominant kind of makeup of the of that third party farm worker that would come in? Would be the Latino groups, and then how did that interaction happen, and how did the Latinos find similarly situated to the Japanese this amazing location called the Yakima Valley?
Well, we couldn't have made the farm work without the help of
You
those
could or
family.
could not?
We could not have.
Yeah, yeah,
No
got
way.
it. Yeah. Hmm.
And so and a lot of those people were, like I said, they've been with us for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, they're just like family almost,
Huh.
and
Wow.
sometimes maybe closer than family.
Uh huh.
But yeah, they uh, they pretty much, you know, made the farm.
Lon, where
And
did they come from? I mean, if they're family, and would they come seasonally? You're happy to see them when they would come around the season. I mean, how was that interaction? How did that work?
well, um, in my dad's early years, there were not a lot of Hispanic people. They pretty much did most of the stuff themselves. But after the war, I think that's when they shipped all the Japanese off the West Coast. I think that's when they started the Bracero program, because somebody still had to do the work, and
Hmm.
that's when the Hispanics started coming in. And when my dad came back, I remember, you know, three or four guys Loopy and Lalo
Hmm.
and Pete. These are some of the early guys. My dad he'd pick cantaloupes or pick tomatoes with the guys. When I was growing up, before we became grower, packer, shippers, we're just growers. And, my dad at 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock, my little brother would carry a 6 pack of beer out to my dad and his farm workers, and he'd have beer with them and then get back to work, they were with us for a long time. And, as we became packers and shippers, um, we actually grew the farm from around 200 acres to, like 1,600 acres over this
Wow, that's almost 10
4 year
times.
period of
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
you
That's
know
that.
and as we did that, we needed more people, and the Hispanic people were there. And like I said, we've had guys who were there ever since I came back to the farm in the 80s, who are still there, currently on the farm, helping the tribe to transition into agriculture as well.
Lon, this is a fascinating time to have this conversation as you think about the non Japanese, the non Yakima, the non Latino experience with their food. But here's this Indian land producing amazing produce with Japanese and Latinos sitting side by side working together. It's not easy work. It's very hot, heavy, and hard work. And I'm not so sure that the rest of the folks that have this amazing produce in their grocery store and in their kitchen, in their pantry, even having any awareness that that's where the food comes from. And to hear you talk about your Latino brothers, and you said even better than family sometimes, or stronger relationship than family, I get that and I understand that probably all too well right now. Um, what, in terms of their background, in looking at their needs, as you said, better than family, and you named them by name, and when they would come, and when you started thinking about housing, what was the housing like before Lon and Naba started working on workforce housing as it relates to agriculture? What was their housing like before you started getting involved and tried to provide good, adequate, or even better housing? What can you describe their housing before you
Well,
started that work?
most of the time the housing was non-existent.
Where'd they
And
live?
well, they lived in their cars.
Oh my
They
goodness.
li- they slept in the orchards.
Hmm.
They, because you have to realize that um, labor was, the harvest season, it's seasonal.
Hmm.
So during the winter, you really can't do any farming out here.
Hmm.
And with snow on the ground, and as the seasons came, the people would come, and as I was growing up, we would do most of the work ourselves. And the apple harvest came, and people would come to work for maybe 3 weeks, and need all these people for 3 weeks, and all of a sudden they don't need anymore. So these guys would be migrating from Florida to California to, maybe New York, even in the wintertime, you know, looking for work. And I think that's the way it used to be,
I've got this picture in my
not
head
just,
about like a caravan, like, station wagons and families and station wagons and caravanning from Yakima to Northern California down in the Imperial Valley and et cetera. I mean, is that the way it went?
that was all workers, not
Okay.
just Hispanic workers. I mean,
Hmm.
there were Caucasian people coming back from, the Dust Bowl kind of guys. They migrated out here, and the tribal people would would work on the farms. But you know when the harvest season was not there, you didn't need as many people. And so what we did was we actually housed people. The first housing that we had was the old housing that was on the places that we farmed. And they're just simply old houses. One of them was the house that I grew up in. And it's not like you know you make a lot of money on farming, and so um, you don't have the luxury, but we needed the people, and the only people, the best way that we figured we could hold on to people is provide them with housing. And so we started with our old houses, and eventually we heard about a program uh, from the Farmers Home Administration that nobody was participating in, and that was uh, for seasonal farm workers. And so, because I came from the Hanford Nuclear Reservation on a big old company working with the government, I was used to paperwork. And so I applied. I probably had 100 pounds of paper that it took in the 1980s to apply for farm worker housing. So
Were
I
you one
got
of the
one.
first ones to do that?
I was one of the first ones in the Yakima Valley
Okay.
to do that. And
Yeah. Pioneer,
um,
hero.
well, you know, when you have no money, you have to figure out, well, how do you find some money? And here was a situation when they were given 1% 33-year loans at the same time that farm loans were 10, 12%. And so how do you turn down 1% 33-year money? And we did that. And we built the housing ourselves. So rather than have a contractor built it, we built it. And I used my farm workers in the wintertime. And we built a duplex for 48 people. Um, and It was actually nicer than the house that I grew up in.
Hmm.
And we didn't have air conditioning and initially because my dad didn't have air conditioning in his house. And so when my dad got air conditioning, my guys got air conditioning.
Okay.
And it was a very good thing for the farm
Yeah.
because we could hang on to our workers, and we could provide them with a nice place to live, probably better than what most of those guys were accustomed to living in. And so with the housing and with the veggies that they could take home, almost everything we grow was pretty typical in Hispanic diet. So it worked out really good for my workers. And and even if we weren't in our harvest season, as long as my guys uh, were loyal employees and would come back to our farm when we needed them, we allowed them to uh, stay in our housing. And um, but it made it so that when we did need them, they were there, they were available, and it gave them a stable place to live because if you're traveling around the country and you only come during the time when everybody else is harvesting, then there's always a shortage of housing. And so that was why people were living in the orchards and vineyards and taking baths in the ditch banks. And so when we could provide them with a safe, secure place, that was a big penny for those guys. And um, because we did that, we were kind of popular with the government. So the USDA, Farmers Home Administration, would bring all the monkey bucks from DC, and they would tour our facilities. And we had a big groundbreaking ceremony, and all the monkey bucks from the area would come out. And so because we were one of the first guys to do that, we uh, were pretty popular among the news media and the politicians, and uh, and even our governor Gary Locke is he was the first Chinese American to become governor of the state of Washington. He actually wanted to make farm worker housing a key point in his administration, and so he actually visited our farm. And it was funny because when the governor walked into our office, I shook his hand and I looked at my mom. I was ready to introduce the governor to my mother. She said, "Just a minute." And she got on our radio and put in an order with our foreman. And she said, Gallo, I need 14 pallets of jalapenos, 16 of serranos, and blah, 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 something else. And then she put the phone down and shook the governor's hand. I was kind of irritated at first, but then she had to get the business done.
I'm a little
And
busy here right now, Governor. Sorry.
yeah. And so yeah, and so but Governor Locke made the housing a high point in his career.
Mhm.
And so he developed these infrastructure loan programs for growers to try to incentivize more housing. And so we also took advantage of those and went to like three different other locations and built additional housing. And so a lot of the other growers started to take advantage of those programs as well. And so I think it really increased the availability of housing
Mhm.
uh, for farm workers because the Yakima Valley really needed that. And I think we were actually, was it Life magazine or something like that, did some kind of harvest to shame, showing the poor conditions of the farm workers.
Mhm.
And so with our housing, it really put a positive light on how the farm workers could be viewed and how they could be taken care of and showed their needs and show the deficiencies in our communities for accommodating those people. So I'm
Lon,
proud
what's
of
really amazing is I think the easy and the most natural thing to do would be to do what everybody else was doing, which is nothing. I mean, just status quo, just, let the farm worker come. And if they're willing to come and, sleep in the orchard, and, maybe that's the way it was, and maybe that's the way it would stay. So I think, you kind of taking a different path again, not the easier path because somebody had to come up with a concept and somebody had to design the process and like you said, that 100 pounds of paper working as your Hanford experience and coming back and then writing all the grants in terms of the funding and financing of this housing. If you look back on that, in just not with any real science, but just generally looking back in terms of like the percentage of migrant versus local labor, and you look at it Latino versus other kind of labor, and then you look at the Latino documented and undocumented. Kind of looking back on it, how would you describe the participants and inhabitants of the farm worker housing from that perspective, whether it's migrant versus local, Latino versus other, and then documented versus undocumented? Could you give us some insight to that in terms of who was living in the housing?
well, agricultural work has always been looked down upon.
Hmm.
And so farmers have not been treated or respected very highly, and farm workers even less. And so, I mean, even my family, you know, they always said, hey, you don't want to be a farmer, you want to go to college, you want to get a degree, and you want to get a job, get a real job somewhere.
Mm.
And that was why we all went to college. Surprisingly, we all came back in our family.
Hmm.
I don't think that's the case in most families. But I guess
Why did you all come back? I mean, you guys, the Inabas are unusual in a very positive way in a number of different instances. But what called you back home? I mean, why didn't you stay out and become a nuclear engineer at Hanford and beyond? I mean, like you said, farming is hard, heavy, hot work. Why'd you come back to that?
well, I think it's because we saw what our parents and our grandparents went through,
Hmm.
and we wanted to we wanted to make them proud.
Mm. So
So
making your grandfather proud is really great motivation. So, Lon, you described a little bit about the concepts, the design, the funding, financing of workforce, housing, farm worker housing. How about the contracting? Like, who actually built the housing? Did you guys actually build the housing yourselves?
oh yeah, we
Wow.
did just because we needed things for our guys to do, and that gave us we
Did
got
you
the
do
money.
that off season?
Yeah, we
Oh,
did it all
okay.
off season,
Oh, wow.
and
Okay.
because I had a degree in engineering, um, we always tried to do as much as we could. You try to keep the money in house. You know,
Yeah.
if you get these low interest loans or grants, you want to maximize what you can do with it, and you want to maximize the benefit to uh, the people in the organization. And so, what it did for us was, you know, not only did the guys uh, learn something, you know, it wasn't always perfect, but it was good. It turned out good, and it gave my guys pride in accomplishment. And once you start learning how to nail, hammer nail, when you learn how to do a little concrete, learn how to put a little roofing on, it's not rocket science. And so a lot of guys don't have the opportunity to to even try some of those things, and I figured, hey, if these guys could pick peppers, they could hammer nail, they
Hmm.
could they could put roof, do the roofing, and we pulled wires, we did a lot of things, and I had a lot of friends, and I who were tradespeople, and they were good enough to give me some advice, and we went through all the inspections, and we passed.
So
And
pounding
so it's
nails and applying the roofing is one thing, but project management and managing a schedule and passing inspections and whatnot, was that chiefly you doing that kind of work on the project management side and making sure that you cleared inspections?
sure.
How
You
many
know,
units did you guys build?
we built two duplexes initially,
Okay.
48 occupancy for 48 people. And then eventually, we pretty almost doubled that and over the years. And so we didn't have housing for everybody, but we had housing for a big portion of our guys.
Hmm.
And so yeah, it was good. It was good for us, and it was good for the workers. And so if you treat people the way you want to be treated, comes back.
Hmm.
And so my guys, my neighbors would be amazed with how hard our guys worked with what they were used to seeing. But if you treat them good, they treat you good.
Oh, that's such a good, wise, kind of a method to approach life with, and it's just amazing. When you think about the various housing types and designs and duplexes versus something else, and the site selection, we'll put it here as opposed to somewhere else. Building for larger families with amenities. I'm not going to say a playground, but families with family type of amenities. How hard was that to make those kinds of decisions? Because it seems like it's on one hand it's very transactional, and like you said, if you keep the labor happy and build it, they'll come. And that kind of a process. But at some point, there's got to be kind of a line on how many amenities and how many bedrooms and those kinds of things. Did you find yourself sometimes conflicted with making those decisions, and were there times that it was a tough decision to make? But we're going to put up not a barrack, but we're going to put up more beds for the actual worker as opposed to for that permanent housing family, and we know how many kids they've got, that kind of thing. Did you find yourself in difficult situations making tough decisions sometimes?
Well, when I first built that housing, because of the uh, management by the USDA Farmers Home Administration, um, they had built uh, farm worker housing or low income housing in other areas, and they encouraged me to make them similar to the housing that was existing in the area. And part of the reason that I did what I did was because um, areas that they built like complexes with a lot of concentration of people really was kind of atypical for the community. And so I tried to build things in a way so it didn't really stand out. It looked just kind of like what everybody else already had there,
Yeah.
you know.
Hmm.
And what I found after I built the duplexes was that, even 40 people in one spot was maybe more than some people could handle. And it brought more attention to the fact that it was farm worker housing, and you get this uh, NIMBY kind of
Hmm.
attitude where people didn't want to have farm worker housing in their neighborhoods because it was too disruptive or it was different from what they're used to seeing. And so my philosophy was try not to build the housing so that people actually know that it's housing for farm workers. You know, make it look like it's just a normal part of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so I went to uh, you know the duplexes as a way to kind of, I didn't want to make apartments or anything like that because it just draws too much attention and there's too many people in one spot,
Yeah.
you know. And I wanted to diverse it, make it more diverse so that, and more dispersed so that, it looked just like the rest of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
You didn't have 100 cars in one spot, or you didn't have, 100 people in one spot with nothing to do in the off season,
Yeah.
and
Right.
so my plan was, if I made it better than 50% of the neighborhood, then the neighborhood can't complain, you know, because my yards always look better than 50% of the neighborhood. I managed it to keep my guys, uh, if they were starting to do some stupid things, I managed it so that it didn't detract from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And if you could do that, you know, a lot of times the first cars my guys would have, they got because they worked on our farm because they had a stable job and they could afford a car. And but we try to put our housing on the farm so that they really didn't need to have too much transportation. They could just walk to the farm, and by having it close by, it worked out good for us. And if they started accumulating too many junk cars, I would say, guys, if it looks like junk, then it's junk.
Yeah.
Okay. I said, if you take care of the vehicles, if you keep the junk out of it, you keep the air in the tires, you know, um, then you're great to keep them at our housing. But if it looks like junk, it's junk, and I'm going to call the junk dealer to come pick them up and take them away.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to manage things, and you manage the people because initially we started out with single males, and sometimes you get too many single males together in one spot, they can cause some problems.
Oh, you think?
And so you got that testosterone out there that and so I want to control that.
Yeah.
And we built housing um, so that they could transition into family housing.
Yeah.
And so as we built additional housing, we built them so that we can accommodate families. And it worked out really good. And initially, a lot of guys who were kind of against our housing, you know, realized that, wow, these are some of the best neighbors I could get, you know, because for one, you kind of control them, and you teach people, to take care of your neighborhood and to take care of your neighbors. When my neighbors would find a box of corn on their doorstep during the corn season, or a bag of onions on the doorstep, they kind of learned to appreciate that, hey, it's kind of nice to have these guys who work on a produce farm.
Yeah.
and they became good neighbors, and actually we kind of helped to teach our people how to be good neighbors. And if you could do that, then people kind of like to have you around. And once we started doing that, we had really no opposition to the housing that we produced. I see people putting in housing, with 100 guys on one spot, and it really does detract from your neighborhood. And people don't want to have 100, you know, farm workers, single farm workers in one spot. But if you make it so it blends into the neighborhood, I think it fits so much better. And in a time when maybe the farm's not around, or when the facilities get old, you know, they don't become bad places. You know, they can transition into single family housing. And there's actually value to your housing that way too. you know and so I think you have to think for the future. Too many times people try to get the cheapest options at the time, and that doesn't always work. We try to always think a little bit ahead of the game. What's going to happen in the future, um, and how does it affect your community, and how is the community going to view that? And so, you know, I think that, hey, if we start doing, I even talked to our county commissioners and tell them that there's no reason we should have unaffordable housing, in our communities with vast acreages out here. You know, if you just allow auxiliary dwelling units to be on a parcel, um, you could double the available housing and make housing more affordable for folks without negatively affecting agricultural croplands. So, I was actually asked by the Yakima Nation Housing Authority to kind of help them learn how to build some housing on tribal land. And I'm hoping to use that as an example, um, for the rest of our county officials, to show that, hey, you know, if you build some auxiliary dwelling units, you're giving people um, more affordable housing. And if it's managed, if the responsibility of those auxiliary units is managed by whoever owns the property, and not allowed to negatively affect the community, you know, then that's a good thing. And so that's what I'm hoping we can do in the future, as I morph out of, being the farm guy to maybe helping the community to look at other housing options. I think what I've learned in the farm worker housing um, experiences that I've had, can also um, help the communities uh, to find affordable housing um, options. So, yeah, I think you kind of have to put your perspective. What would I do if somebody wanted to build a unit with 100 people next to me? Would I like that?
Yeah, right.
You know, if I don't like that, then maybe I shouldn't be doing that. If I can't live in that community, why should I expect somebody else to live in those same kind of conditions? And that was one thing my dad always told me: you just treat people the way you want to be treated. And I think if people use that that method of thinking, uh, we'd all be better off.
Lon, you talk about neighborhoods and you talk about being good neighbors in those neighborhoods. Not everybody celebrates the 4th of July. Not everybody celebrates the Treaty of 1865 in the Yakima Valley, and not everybody celebrates Cinco de Mayo. Have you seen opportunities where you can create safe, good, healthy neighbors being good neighbors with those three cultures kind of coexisting? in the same valley.
Yeah, I think if people just get to know each other,
Yeah,
you know, then it's kind of hard to point fingers at people. If it's somebody that you don't know, and if it's just somebody kind of off in a distance that maybe you don't like because there's 100 farm workers in one spot,
yeah,
or or there's a different culture celebrating that you don't understand. But once you learn who those people are, and then you learn that they're not that much different than everybody else,
yeah, right.
you learn the value in those kind of relationships. And I mean, that's tough for some people because, if some people think they're better than others, or you think they're more entitled to things than others, then that's not a good situation. And if you're willing to get to know folks, you appreciate those differences, and you learn from those differences, and you get better from those differences. And so, yeah, it's hard to see such a divisive society kind of happening. You know, I'm more a middle of the road kind of guy.
Well, being a middle of the road kind of guy, my last question I would have around this particular issue is today, as you're no longer actively farming, you're no longer actively building farmer housing, but you are a good leader in that community. In that community is in this intersection of immigration, tariff import, federal funding, changing climate, then with federal oversight and disruption to the normal or regular kind of process that might be happening there, and a farmer who wants to advocate with risks for immigration, for immigrant workforce. What would you say to that particular farmer who says these are family? These are better than family sometimes. I know these people. I've been around them for a very, very long time. And somebody says, that's a person headed for deportation, and so somebody has to stand up with us, kind of like with some risk. What might you offer that voice for that farmer who says, I'm an advocate for these people? Do you have any words of wisdom or advice?
Well, I guess from the perspective of the Native Americans, we're probably all illegal aliens.
Hmm.
you know, and and maybe from that Native perspective, the later natives might be illegal aliens as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so you know, things change, and I think that I'm grateful to the kindness that people showed to my grandparents when others were not kind.
Mm-hmm.
And so uh, those are the guys I remember. And so if we all strive to try to show a little kindness, you know, when everybody else is maybe not showing the kindness, then I think we're going to stand out. And
Yeah.
I think the what goes around comes around.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we have to respect each other, and that's all it takes.
Yeah.
And the more you get to know folks, the more you realize that we're really not that different.
Yeah. So, Lon, I'd like to ask you another question. Beyond housing, in your quest to make life better, easier, less physically demanding for your farm worker, um, what are other things, beyond housing? We talked about some of the equipment pieces and some of the infrastructure. Are there other things that the Inabas have done in terms of a pioneering way to make life better for the farm worker and the farm worker family?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of some of the changes we made was diversifying the farm.
Okay.
So not only did we have housing, but we actually had work for the guys for a long period of time.
Okay.
And that's important because you know, otherwise, how do you turn people on and turn people off? You want to have something that's that's there for them every day.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have things to do, and you can do that by diversification. And we did a lot of, like I said, during the winter months, we did a lot of construction.
Yeah.
We poured a lot of concrete. We poured
Right.
acres of concrete over the last 40 years. You know, we built our ice plant. We built warehouses and yeah, there's things that you kind of do that maybe not officially are considered farm labor, but you keep your guys employed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, the bottom line, everybody has to make a living. And you have to give guys a way to make a living. And because of the fact that we taught them how to do these construction things, I did lose a few folks to
Yeah.
construction.
Yeah. They're no longer farmers,
know?
and now they're in the construction industry.
Yeah, yeah, and so, and that's just natural.
Yeah.
That's just natural. But in reality, you have ebbs and flows in all these uh, uh, lines of employment, even construction.
Yeah. Right.
And so
Yep.
there are a lot of times when I just told my guys, well, if you want to go into construction, I said, before you do, go look at your buddy's W-2 who is in construction, and you tell me who's got a better W-2.
Okay.
And quite often, my guys have the better
Yeah.
W-2.
Nice.
You know,
Yeah. Right.
they may work a lot more hours, during the season, and maybe a few less in the off season. But the bottom line is, if you got a better W-2, then that should tell you something.
Yeah. Right.
And my guys, the smart ones, um, when I don't have work, they seem like they always got work because I taught them how to pour concrete. They're pouring concrete for their fellow neighbors,
Yeah.
or they're doing a roof, or they're putting new siding on, or they're
Mm-hmm.
painting. And if you give people skills, then you can't take skills away from people.
Right. Yep.
And so you're kind of empowering people.
Yeah.
And, and that's what I'm hoping will happen with the travel farming operation that we left, and hopefully they will learn how to do other things besides farming,
Yeah.
which will help to empower them to to go on and if they like construction better, then hey, go do some construction. But at least the farm can afford these guys the experiences as young children or young adults or just new people to coming in doing these jobs.
Mm-hmm.
If you give them an opportunity to do these things, then people realize, hey, I like doing this, and it gives them incentive to do better. Uh, and whereas if they've never had that opportunity, it's foreign to them,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know. And so you want to give people opportunities, and I just think that there's so many things that can be done that that enriches the community,
Mm-hmm.
enriches the people, and but you kind of have to. You don't have these expectations. People have these false expectations that hey, this is my job or this is not my job, And if you're willing to do almost anything, whereas growing up, we did everything. We pulled weeds, we picked peppers, we picked corn, we packed corn, we worked in the greenhouses, we changed the irrigation water. We did all these things that we're asking our guys to do. And and if and if people realize that there's uh, there's value in knowing the whole system, it gives you perspective on how to treat other people because now you realize that what they're doing is not easy.
Hmm.
and uh, and and then you help those guys learn how to do more things as well, and when you do that, people appreciate your contributions as well. You know, yeah, coming from doing all the paperwork, yeah, it's kind of like, well, shoot, there's so many times I think I'd rather be sitting on a tractor
Yeah.
than filling forms or dealing with problems, other types of problems, and so yeah, and I think by allowing uh, people to do a lot of different things, um, you're enriching everybody that way.
I'm not surprised, but just continue to be amazed, Lon, that you described at one point, the hydrologist, the biologist, botanist, engineer. You told me a little bit about your brother and the mechanic. If you can elaborate on that just for about a half a second in terms of your brother and his trying to figure out the one kind of tractor that you guys committed to as the Inaba Farms and the reason why you committed to one kind of tractor. Can you talk a little bit about your brother being the mechanic of the?
That was my brother-in-law.
Okay, your brother-in-law. Yeah.
and
Can
and
you tell me more
and
about that?
while he was dating my little sister, he was going to college, going to high school, and he was taking um, mechanics classes in high school, and he would, you know, they would ask their project would might be a transmission, and so he'd just come to the farm and say, "Hey, I need to work on a transmission. Do you have anything that needs a transmission?" And you know, most of our stuff was pretty wore out. So we always had all kinds of projects for him to take into class, and he would tell us stories of the instructors would gather everybody else around and say, "Wow, look at the front end of this track, this pickup." He goes, "This is the worst front end I've ever seen in my whole life." And so when people would have problems finding projects to work on in their classes. My brother-in-law had tons of, and so, but because he grew up working on our equipment, he was very good at it and very, very, um, very conscientious, very competent. And, uh, and through the years, the farm was a good source of employment for him. And, but even as he got um, more educated, went to college, and got other jobs, he would still come back and work on the farm on the weekends. He was just a hard worker, and but I think he felt that he maybe owed us a little bit because we gave him the experience to work on these things, and so he probably worked on our stuff out of charity too,
Yeah.
because trying to pay back,
Yeah.
what he might have received from us, and so yeah, but yeah, we would bring back all kinds of old equipment, but he would fix it, and but as we would work behind these tractors, we found some of these hydrostatic uh, transmissions on these international harvester tractors were just ideal for working and planting behind, harvesting behind, and so yeah, so we kind of accumulated quite a bit of these hydros, and I don't know of anybody else in the valley that has more hydros than what we've accumulated on the farm.
Yeah.
But they just work slick, and they're not fancy ass tractors. They're pretty basic tractors,
Hmm.
but you can work behind them, and we've got some of these tractors that might go uh, maybe less than a quarter mile in 4 hours. you they just barely creak. You can just barely see those wheels turning, but they're perfect for working behind uh, harvesting or planting, and so that worked out, and it just made, we always did things to make the job easier for the people.
Hmm.
And so if they had a conveyor to set the produce on so they didn't have to walk over to the trailer and dump out the buckets, it's always better to let the conveyor do the work than the people do the work. And it keeps them more efficient, and they can produce better. And so yeah, and it was just amazing that my brother-in-law could fix so many things that were wrong with the tractor. But he grew up in it, just like we grew up farming. He grew up working on that equipment and helping us on the farm.
I don't want to take it too deep of a dive on the equipment piece, but I did recollect now you showing me this piece of equipment that you had some umbrellas over, that the ladies who would normally be bending over their back and planting, they would actually sit down in the shade and just reach over and plant, and made it much easier for those ladies. So I understand now with the air conditioning in the housing, sometimes better housing than you had access to, and then all this other technologies on the equipment side, that you were very cognizant of the how hard farming was or is, and then how you tried to make it better and easier for some of those workers. So great respect to you, Lon, and the Inaba family for being such good managers, not just of lands and of plants and of business, but quite honestly of people. So when you think about some of the most important relationships, we discussed a lot of different groups and people and governments and tribes and landlords and the federal government and kind of the Heart Mountain experiences. What are some of the most important relationships that you had developed in the kind of in the history of the Inaba farms, and maybe in relation to the housing piece, and what made that the most important relationship?
Well, labor is our biggest expense by far.
Okay.
And so if you take care of labor, one of the biggest ways to take care of the people is to give them good housing. And so we did the housing deal, but because of the housing that we had, we expanded our harvest season as well. So we diversified our crop mix, and that allowed our people to work almost continuously from the 1st of April till you know the end of October, and we had a lot of work for probably 25 people almost year round, and so it worked out really good. And rather than just having these intermittent harvest periods like most people, we tried to have a continuous harvest period. And because of that, it made it so that we can ship and communicate with our customers on a longer period of time as well. And so it really kind of works, and it's kind of like a mutual fund, instead of putting all your money into one thing, you're diversifying your income stream and have multiple crops. And so that way, if you have a drought situation, or if you have seasonality, if you have fluctuating prices, if you have a frost, you kind of you're not totally you're not totally out of business, because agriculture is very uncertain. And so, in order to deal with the uncertainties of the marketplace, by diversifying, you cover your bases a little bit more, and you're kind of averaging everything out. And and but in doing so, you're actually providing a more stable working season for the people. And so that's probably part of the reason we have people who've worked for us for so many years, because they didn't have to go looking elsewhere for work. They could pretty much work the whole season on our farm.
Yeah, permanent family and permanent friends and permanent housing, not seasonal. There's a lot of innovation
Yeah.
that's happening, technology and hardware, software, and various things. You've been participatory in crafting and inventing some of those technologies that have made it better, easier, and more worker friendly in terms of not just the housing with the air conditioning, but also some of the technologies out in the field. Um, how fast do you think this technology is changing? And I'm not talking about the new edition of the new iPhone. The housing and whatnot. Do you see us going forward in the future with farm labor, kind of workforce housing, and even in light of kind of our current state of our political state of immigration and farm and kind of cutting back on immigration, cutting back on farming support, things like that. What does your crystal ball tell you about what does the future look like based on your experience?
We deal with a product that um, we consider premium quality. When you have something uh, that has a superior quality, uh, you'll actually get more money for it. People are willing to pay for something that's good. And if you're looking at mechanically harvested stuff, usually you have a lot more damage. And so, um, and when you start talking robotics and all this stuff, unless you have it going, unless you have apples 365 days a year, or tomatoes 365 days a year, it's very difficult to put a lot of money into uh, investment into some of these robotic kind of devices. So, so it's pretty tough to replace the human eyes and the human hands. And so, it might work for wheat and hay and potatoes, or processing tomatoes or something like that. But if you're talking fresh market stuff, um, it's not easy. It's not easy, and um, I don't see technology really taking over and replacing all of these workers. And if we don't have any workers, then the food's just going to have to come from somewhere else,
Hmm.
because most likely the local folks um, don't want to work as hard as the immigrant guys in making things happen. And if we're going to compete with somebody, and the workers stay in Mexico or South America, then that's where the food's going to have to come from, because we can't compete. If we're paying more per hour than most of these guys are making all day, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to do the same thing and put out the same quality. So, I don't know what's going to happen.
Lon, I think
Um,
that, kind of based on experience, you're probably one of the premier folks to ask this question about in terms of, kind of pressing you a little bit more about what's going to happen. If we're not going to do the work, we're depending on somebody else. You've got this immigration issue happening in our country, and people, not wanting to do that hard work. And if we don't do it, then who's going to do it? And then you've got the taxing of the farmer and the food you just suggested it's going to come from somewhere else. Well, now we've got all these tariffs on the export-import issue happening. What happens not down the road? What happens at harvest? What happens in the grocery store? Like, not tomorrow, now.
uh, I think that food is cheap in the United States, and unless you want it in a can, like canned tomatoes, and I'm sure the reason you didn't like asparagus, Roger, was because it was probably in a can.
Yeah.
The minute you have something that's high quality, that's fresh, it's so much more nutritious and it's
Mm-hmm.
so much better for you,
Mm-hmm.
and it tastes better. And I think that unless we want everything in a can or frozen and shipped from somewhere else, um, you're going to have to support the local guys, the local farmers. And I look at the tribal community with their emphasis on food sovereignty and say, wow, that's really forward thinking, because if you have no food, people can hold you hostage.
Hmm.
Okay. And if we're dependent on other people to grow our food in other countries, um, then we might have some pretty bare shelves unless we want something in a can. And if
Hmm.
you put all these tariffs on here, those things in the can are not going to be cheap either.
Hmm.
And so you just have to figure out, well, how do you make this thing work? But you know, uh, in my opinion, fresh, local, and in season is the way people ought to eat. You know, and if we could do this in our communities, that's what we should be doing. And if you take away people's livelihoods and make it uneconomical for people to become farmers, then you lose that knowledge in your local communities. And even though you have land or water, if nobody knows how to grow it, it ain't going to happen. And so you have to make it economical for people to to be able to make a livelihood and support their families into professional farming. And like I said, I just think that you know the step to the Yakimos purchasing the farm, you know, and actually a successful uh, farming operation, complete with the workforce there. To me, I think that's a tremendous opportunity to protect your own people and your own communities, and give them a secure food source. I think that's important, and I think that more people ought to be um, realizing that. Like I said, I credit the tribal communities for being forward thinking, uh, and being concerned about food sovereignty. I think that's why the Japanese rice farmers, they didn't allow California rice into their country for a long time because they didn't want to put their rice farmers out of business because that is their food security.
Hmm.
And so I think if the minute you're a little hungry, then you realize that it's very important to have locally grown food.
Lon, you've said a couple times it's not easy. In this part of the interview and another part of the interview, you said this is not easy. Talking about not easy, what are one of the hardest lessons that you've had to learn in regard to you know farm worker housing, in terms of farming and agriculture, in terms of politics, and just kind of like this whole fascinating life that you have lived? What are some of the hardest lessons that you've had to learn?
You could do everything right. You could do everything according to plan and still lose your ass
Okay.
because the market went to hell. Okay. Or you had a frost, or
Mm.
you had no people to do the job.
Hmm.
And so you kind of have to, that's why we diversified our farming operation so that, if one crop is a disaster, you don't lose your farm. And a lot of guys have lost their farms because they had
Mm.
one bad year, it can put you out of business. And if you have a diversified operation, it's not easy. It's actually more difficult to farm 20 different crops than it is two.
Yeah.
But you cover your butt a little bit.
Hmm.
And I think that's a big thing to learn.
Yeah.
And conversely, you could do everything wrong and still come out smelling like a rose if you just happen to hit the market at the right time.
Yeah.
You know,
Interesting.
and unlike wheat or corn or soybeans that might move a couple of cents a day or a week or a month, fresh produce, you go from making money to losing big bucks in a couple of days because it's just supply and demand. And since it's highly perishable, um, if you have it when nobody else has it, then you can make some money if you're smart. You know, you have to be in the marketplace, and you have to have it. And if you have it of good quality, people will prefer your produce over somebody else's.
Hmm.
If you're just fighting for the least cost producer, you're never going to win
Hmm.
because there's just so much there that so many opportunities to go south, you know, and so yeah, I think over time, I mean, there's a reason why we're still in business when a lot of guys are not.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of have to diversify, and you have to you have to put some money aside and be prepared for bad times,
Yeah.
to, and your workers and your landlords and your community helps you to deal with that. You know, you kind of look out for each other, and if you could do that, that's probably the best way to best part of community. And you know, and so if we can work together, uh, we protect each other, and
Hmm.
that's what's important.
Lon, if I'm a farmer, if I'm a tribe, and I'm interested in being successful as you have been in farm worker housing, where would I go? I mean, are there places of support and assistance that I could go to that I should know about?
Well, in the past, USDA was a very good source of funding for minority farmers, for new farmers, uh, for people who want to uh, do some innovation, maybe value added kind of crops, or more energy efficient kind of practices, things that actually benefit others. You know, if you could save water, the NRCS is a good place to get cost share money to implement conservation practices on the farm. If you're a new guy, USDA Rural Development uh, can have money there to help you start a farm, uh, or start housing if you want to build housing. You know, and so there are sources out there, and I think because of everything that the tribal communities have suffered through, there are a lot of private entities that really are willing to help support, you know, tribal innovations as well.
Hmm.
Um, but you kind of, you know, you kind of have to make a pitch to people, and tell them what you want to do, and then once you get the grant, you better do what you said you're going to do. And once you start a history of doing things, then I think dollars will come.
Hmm.
People want success, want to support successful enterprises,
Hmm.
and so um, you know, and when you improve the community by being in business, then people are going to want to help promote you as well. And so, you know, we're all in this thing together, and you know, we help each other out. And I think that, you know, even in tough times, if people work together and help each other out, uh, we're all going to be better off.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really encouraging and sounds very hopeful. Lon, we've talked a lot about farming. We've talked a lot about the Inaba and the Inaba family and farm worker housing and kind of the concepts, the design, the financing, construction, and project management around all that. Um, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that maybe you'd like to people to know?
You know me, Roger. I could talk forever.
Well, I hope this isn't I hope this is just yet another conversation, Lon, that I love having with you. I always feel like I've learned more about you, about farming, about housing, but actually, honestly, about myself along the way in these conversations that I've had with you, and hopefully we can have more. Where can people learn more about you? Actually, is there a place that I can point people to learn about you and your work?
I don't know. I guess NPR,
Yeah.
you know, they've done stuff on us.
Hmm.
You know, the New York Times did some articles. I guess Google is pretty fantastic a tool
Yeah.
for doing research,
Okay.
and um, yeah, and you know, I think if people just remember to treat people the way they want to be treated, this place would be a hell of a lot better off.
Yeah.
And if we support local, if we local businesses, local farmers, um, I think everybody will be better off, and our communities will be more secure. Um, and you don't have to eat strawberries in the middle of January.
Hmm.
If you eat what's in season, then you'll be supporting your local growers
Hmm.
and keeping those dollars in your local communities. I just think that's important. And um, you know, don't forget how to unplug your own toilets.
Yeah.
Don't forget how to fix your own houses.
Hmm.
And if you could do things like that, if you can grow your own food, um, then you'll always have food.
Yeah.
And so that's just the way that I think we kind of need to think like that. Those are kind of the old ways.
Mm.
Uh, but I see a lot of my friends are growing chickens. Maybe pretty soon they'll have their own cows.
Yeah.
But you have to support your local food systems. And if you don't support them, they're not going to be around.
Hmm.
Don't support your local businesses, they won't be around.
Yeah.
The local providers, they won't be around.
Mm.
Maybe we get into bartering a little bit more. We don't have to deal in cash.
Yeah. Right.
So there's a lot of things. And I think community is the most important thing to remember that, we're all in this thing together and we have to support each other. We depend on each other. And so a little kindness, a little compassion, a little gratitude, that goes a long way. You know, I don't think any of us should be feeling like we're entitled because we're black or white or rich or poor
Hmm.
or educated or non-educated. I think we have to all realize that we're in this thing together, and when you do that, life is better and your community's better. And so we just support our own communities. That's the most important thing.
And I can't think of a better way to conclude this particular conversation. I hope there's many that follow this, but as you decomplicate and simplify basics of community and treating others as you wanted to be treated, and you talked about making your grandfather proud, and I sure hope that he is, because what I know about Lon and Naba and the Inaba family is I can just imagine your grandfather as a spiritual being incredibly proud of Lon and Naba and who he is and who he has become. Lon and Naba, as you turn off your tractor at some point, and I hope that you hear all the noise that you have inspired, fostered, created, nurtured, with your amazing life and your life's work. That at that time when you do turn off your tractor, I hopefully am one of those that will have a lot of loud noise coming from where I am, based off of my inspiration from you and what you've done. I so appreciate you, friend, so much. Thank you.
You know,